welcome to the 2020 Hyundai Veloster N. I am Austin, you're watching the rear view mirror, and we're going to give this thing a go. The Hyundai Veloster N is, I think, the newest sort of performance car from Hyundai. Honestly, can't remember when the last time they came out with like a true performance car, true sports car. I know they came out with the Veloster Turbo in, I think 2012 maybe is when it came out. Had a 1.6 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. I think it made 200 horsepower or whatever. But this is, to me, a totally different car and a totally new direction for Hyundai. You know, but I saw an old Hyundai Accent on my way here, and the difference between this car and that car is just, quite frankly, astonishing. You know, it's got like cheap little hubcaps. The car looks cheap and small and just looks like a piece of junk. And this car does not feel like that in any way, despite how much people tell you the hard plastics in the interior of this car kind of suck. It's not that bad. So we're gonna give this thing a go. We're gonna take this thing for a drive and see how it stacks up compared to competitors like the Volkswagen GTI and the Subaru WRX STI and the Honda Civic Type R and all these hot hatchbacks that people get all excited about. So we'll see how the Hyundai Veloster N stacks up. The first thing you notice about this car is how it sounds, and that's one of the biggest takeaways for me in driving this car is, my goodness, does it sound really good. I mean, there's no car that I've driven that has a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that sounds this good. It's got a valved exhaust system, so you can make it quieter or louder depending on how you're feeling. All that stuff can be changed through the infotainment. But right now we've got it in its loudest setting, and I think if you buy this car, you should have it always in the loudest setting. Because it sounds, oh my gosh, it sounds special. And I would say, you know, people say the Civic Type R is the best front-wheel drive car in the world. Maybe it is, but when I'm driving around, I don't necessarily need the best front-wheel drive car in the world. I want something sporty, something fun that I can take around some back roads like the ones that we're on right now, drive it pretty hard, and get some enjoyment out of it. And this does that, and I think the exhaust is the first reason why it does that. It sounds so crazy. You sound like a hooligan, and when people see you drive by, they probably don't expect to see a little Hyundai hatchback drive by, but it crackles, it pops, I mean, it just sounds amazing. It does those little backfires in the exhaust, and I think that helps keep boost in the turbo, so you can exit out of turns a little bit more quickly, and you're always kind of in boost. But man, just what can I say besides just listen to this car? And it feels like it shouldn't sound like this. I mean, you've got again, it's a little hatchback from Hyundai. It should not sound like this, but this is the part of the car that puts the biggest smile on my face. My goodness. I mean, all the other stuff is great about this car. A lot of people talk about this car, but this exhaust, man, this is my favorite part, I think, by far. The next thing that I wanted to talk about with the 2020 Hyundai Veloster N is this engine. It's a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that makes, you know, 275 horsepower, 260 pound-feet of torque. It's not the largest engine in the segment. It's not doesn't have the most horsepower, the most torque. You know, it's on paper not as fast as cars like the Honda Civic Type R. But one thing I will say when you're driving around and you're not, you know, comparing those cars back to back is how torquey it is when it's in the right RPM and how it gets up and goes. I mean, this car only weighs, I think, 3,100 pounds, so 275 horsepower, and the amount of torque that this thing has is more than enough. And if you, let's say, will downshift into high RPMs, the torque just comes on, which is a great feeling. You just sort of roll on the throttle, and you're moving. doesn't feel slow. It feels like it has enough power. It feels torquey. With the auto rev matching feature, you can downshift and get into the right RPM to get up and go to where you have the most torque. So when you're driving on tight, twisty back roads, you can sort of plan out how you want to enter that turn with the engine in the right RPMs to pull yourself quickly out of that turn. And if you do that, it does pull itself quickly out of those turns to where, you know, with the suspension and the steering and the grip that you have in this car, you can enter into corners with a good amount of speed. And when you get it into the right revs coming out of a corner, you can pull out of those corners with a lot of speed, which makes you feel confident going fast. It makes this car feel like a fast car in these tight back roads that we're kind of driving on. The next thing that I wanted to talk about in the Hyundai Veloster N is the steering and the suspension and how this thing actually drives quickly on tight corners, on back roads like the one that we're on now. This thing drives insanely well. I think the first thing to note for me in the steering is how communicative it is. You feel every bump, every undulation, every sort of surface in the road, and it's honestly really helpful as you're driving fast through these tight roads. You want to be able to know where the tires are, where you're going, and this steering communicates all of that to you. It tells you if a wheel is slipping, it tells you if the surface has changed, it tells you if you don't have a ton of grip and you start to understeer. It tells you everything you need to know to be confident going fast around these tight roads. And that for me is an amazing part of this car that I think you might be missing in some of these other cars in the segment. The next thing about the steering is it's quick. It's precise. You know, wherever I want to put this car, I can put this car. There's no feeling that there's a lot of play in the steering wheel, and you don't feel like you have to give a weird amount of effort. It's just predictable, it's precise, and it's amazing. Along with the feel that the steering wheel gives you from the road, you really feel like you have total control over the car with the way the steering is. Another note about the steering is you can kind of adjust the weight to the steering. So you can go through the infotainment in your in custom mode and adjust how light or heavy the steering is in that in custom mode. And for me, I believe I have it in the sport setting, which makes it a little bit heavy. You can definitely feel the weight to the steering in sport, but it's not so heavy to where you feel exhausted, you know, just driving it around. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is just the interior of the car. To me, I've heard a ton of people complain about what the interior materials look like in the Veloster N, and they're right. They're dark and hard plastic and probably not the highest quality interior, but I don't think that's why you buy this car. I just don't. I think obviously competitors like the Volkswagen GTI and the Honda Civic Type R, those cars may have a more refined interior, but I don't know, you also save some money buying this car from, you know, buying the Civic Type R. So you honestly, you take some trade-offs where very clearly in the interior, that's where they wanted to save money so that they could do things like having adaptive suspension. They could have things like the adaptive exhaust, the valved exhaust system, you know, the bigger engine, the electronic limited slip differential in the front. You know, there were a lot of things that they made a decision to include in this car, but in order to save cost, it looks like, you know, they cut some more premium feeling materials out of this interior. So on the doors, there's not really any soft touch material. It's all, again, hard plastic. You don't really have, actually, I don't think you have any leather in the interior of this car. One note for 2021, again, this is a 2020. Hyundai is adding leather sport seats, some lightweight sport seats in this car to make it feel a little bit more premium. I think the infotainment might be a little bit bigger in the 2021 version of the Veloster, but for me, again, the interior is just sort of a footnote to an otherwise really, really special hot hatchback. Another note about the interior, despite the materials not being super high quality, it's laid out super well to me. I mean, everything is easy to find and easy to use. You've got hard buttons for all of your media controls, so, you know, seeking, changing songs, you've got a tuning knob, you've got a volume knob, all of your climate control controls are all hard buttons, and honestly, it makes it really easy to use while you're driving. You know, there's no complex touchscreen based infotainment system where all of your settings are sort of buried in a menu in the touchscreen. It's all kind of at your fingertips, which I really appreciate as we go more and more in this direction of everything has to be a touchscreen. The other thing, I think it's ergonomically well laid out. You know, you've got this armrest on the door, and you've got this glove compartment that to me is in a perfect position where when I'm resting both of my arms on it and I'm using the car, I feel like I'm in exactly the right position. I feel like I can rest my arms on it and still use the steering wheel. It's comfortable. These seats are really comfortable. They're not the flashiest looking seats in the world. They you know, are nowhere near the quality or the coolness of, you know, maybe the seats in the Civic Type R, but they're really comfortable. And that's honestly the most important thing to me as I'm thinking about what kind of seats are in a car that I'm going to buy. You're living with this car every day. You might be taking it on road trips. You want these seats to be comfortable over a long period of time. You don't want to feel like it's a harsh ride with uncomfortable seats, and I would say these seats are incredibly comfortable. The next part of this interior is this tablet-style infotainment system that you see here. This system is all touchscreen, so you can use it with touch inputs. Actually, I think that's the only way to use it, apart from using some of these buttons that you have in the center of the dash. But it's great. You know, it's not the highest quality display, I would say. I think they may have saved some money in that department too. It's not as crisp as some of the Honda displays that I've seen, specifically when using Apple CarPlay, but it's good enough. And so for me, the quality of the screen, even though it's good enough and I don't see any problems with it, that's not the reason why you buy this car. You buy this car because of how it drives. But apart from the quality of the display, the touchscreen's really easy to use. It's really quick and responsive to touch inputs. You know, it doesn't feel laggy. It doesn't feel like it glitches. It just works. And I think that's maybe the summary of this interior for me, is that it just works. Everything is laid out super well. You've got these volume up, volume down, you know, channel up, channel down toggles on the steering wheel. You've got a rev matching button on the steering wheel. You've got your drive mode buttons directly on the steering wheel. You've got hard buttons for the radio and for climate control. You've got a really quick and responsive touchscreen infotainment system. It all just works, which I think is the best part. You know, I think for this car, with the amount of performance that it brings, you would expect some sort of compromises, and yeah, sure, there are some compromises in the interior of this car, but the way that it drives makes up for it. And anyway, the interior just works. It's comfortable. The steering wheel is nice to use. I keep going on and on, but it just works. And I think that's my takeaway for the interior of this car. The next thing about the infotainment setup in this car that I forgot to mention a little bit earlier, you can adjust your in-custom setting through the infotainment. So all you have to do, it's a really prominent thing when you start the car in the infotainment. So it's really clear to see where you would go and make those adjustments to your in custom mode. But once you go in there, you can make changes to the way that the electronic limited slip differential is set up. You can make changes to how the exhaust sounds, whether it's loud or quiet. You can change how stiff or soft the suspension is. I mean, there are just a lot of ways that you can customize your in mode all through the infotainment system. So that's the only thing that I would say that is buried in a menu, even though it's 2 clicks to start customizing your in custom setting. But that's another thing to note, is that, you know, if you want to make those adjustments and those customizations to your in custom mode, your personal mode that is you know, based on your preferences, you can do all of that stuff through the infotainment. You can customize it to do basically whatever you want. You know, if you don't want heavy, sort of sporty steering feel, you want it to be light and easy to use, because you're just driving it every day, you can switch the steering into that normal mode in your in custom mode while keeping the exhaust loud and crazy. That's what makes this really, really special to me, is the level of customization that you can bring to this car. You can really make it your own. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the brakes in this car. Ooh, okay. All right. They work. They work. Just know they work. I take this car out driving a lot, driving it hard on these, you know, twisty roads where there's some hard braking, and the brakes just work. They don't really seem to fade or let me down in any way, which is, I think, what they should do. One thing to note about the brakes too is, yeah, they're grabby. You really feel them start to grab the second you hit the pedal, the brake pedal, but they're also not unbearable to use every day. So it doesn't feel like they're uber touchy to where it's like annoying and you can never come to a smooth stop. They're good enough to where you can sort of ease into a stop as you're coming up to a stoplight, and you don't really feel like jerky. They don't ever feel jerky. They don't ever feel too touchy. Just another good part of this car that I think just works the way that it's supposed to work. The brakes aren't anything special, you know. The Civic Type R has Brembo brakes, I believe. You can upgrade to Brembo brakes in the Subaru WRX and in the STI. But this thing doesn't have those kinds of brakes. They are, I believe they're just larger Hyundai brakes that they found that they use on some of the other models. But they work. I mean, this car with bigger brakes and how small it is, it works and it stops just fine. And you never feel like, oh shoot, are the brakes are they gonna hold me? Are they gonna work the way that I want them to? It's really, you know, they feel good and they're predictable, and you know how to modulate them to get them to do what you want to do, which is the ultimate thing in a car like this where you're driving it hard a lot. You know, you want to know exactly what the car is doing and what you can do with it through things like the brakes, and the brakes do a really great job of doing that. The other thing about them, I mean, they look cool. Like I said, they're not Brembos, but they're painted red, which is awesome. And they have the N logo slapped onto them, which I think is another cool accent feature for this car. So yeah, they look great, they do the job, and they don't seem to fade, and you know, really easy to use. So I would say, you know, the brakes are another great part of this car. The last thing I wanted to talk about with this car is the way that it looks. I think this thing looks really good. I think this thing is the best looking hot hatchback that you can buy, to be honest. And you've got the Volkswagen GTI that's a lot more subdued, that's almost a sleeper in a sense, where if you don't know what it is, you might not really think that it's a really fast, not really fast, but like you wouldn't think that it's a sporty car. The Civic Type R, I think, takes that way, way too far with the huge wing and all the fake vents and all the insaneness that is the way that the Civic Type R looks. I feel like the Veloster N is sort of in that perfect middle ground where it looks sporty. You know, you've got things like the big spoiler on the back, but it's not too big. I mean, it's noticeable and it looks sporty, but it's not too big. It's got a cool triangular F1 style light on it, which I think is a neat touch. You know, you've got these cool looking black side skirts with the red accents. You've got a black front lip with the red accents on the front of the car. It just kind of looks special from the outside. It looks like a performance model, which I think is the way these cars should be. And I think this Veloster, it delivers, I think, in the looks department. You've got really cool headlights that have, they look aggressive. The housing in them is painted black. They look cool. They have really nice, aggressive looking daytime running LEDs. Again, like I think the headlights look great. The taillights look amazing to me. I think amazing is an adequate word for the taillights. They've got the cool looking like Y-shaped like Lamborghini parts of the taillight, which is really, really cool. It just makes them feel, you know, sporty and special and cool. You don't really see any taillights that look nearly as cool as those. If you go down to the front bumper, you've got, again, some cool looking, you know, front vents that are fake. But you also have these little air curtains in the front bumper that are supposed to help stabilize the car as you're going to higher speeds. I really don't know how well those things work. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I think they look cool, and I think it's a cool story to tell when you have this car that got some air curtains to help stabilize you at higher speeds. So in conclusion, maybe, I think to end this out, I mean, what do I think about this car? I think it's the best hot hatchback that you can buy. I think hands down. I think maybe the Civic Type R can go faster around a track, and if that's your thing, you know, maybe the Civic Type R is your car. But this car, in terms of how it makes you feel, in terms of the fun that you have, the amount of smiles that you just sort of slapped on your face after you gun it or you downshift or you hear the exhaust pop, to me, I wouldn't buy any other car. I mean, maybe the Golf GTI is a little bit more refined, and maybe the materials on the inside are a little bit nicer and all that good stuff. But I think if you want a hot hatchback that's going to be fun, that's going to be a riot, that's going to make you laugh and smile, even if you're going to the grocery store, or even if you're going to a restaurant, maybe don't go to a restaurant, but wherever you're going, it puts a smile on your face, and to me, that's all worth it. The other thing to note too is it's cheap compared to like a Civic Type R, so you've got to think, you know, maybe performance isn't as good, but it's pretty close to a Civic Type R, but you pay significantly less money for this car. I would buy this thing. I would buy this thing over the Honda. I'd buy this thing over the GTI. You know, the Subaru is an interesting comparison because that one's all-wheel drive, and maybe if you live in an area where you get snow a lot and the weather sucks, maybe the WRX or the STI makes more sense for you. But I think in most circumstances, this Hyundai Veloster N is the one to buy, and I think this is going to be a car that people are going to remember for a long time. This is going to be a car that came from a company that sort of remaking their image, you know, from having a long history of not really being that noteworthy or noticeable. Hyundai Kia has really come out with a special car, and I think this is going to be one that is remembered fondly when you sort of look back and think on what are some of the greatest hot hatchbacks of all time, what are some of the best sounding four-cylinder engines all the time. So to me, this is a home run. I think this is exactly what Hyundai needed to do when they jumped into the established hot hatchback segment with people who've been there a really long time. To me, this is a home run, and I would say if you're looking for a hot hatchback, if this is the kind of car that you're looking for, I'd say buy this one. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you like car reviews like this, if you like me talking about cars, if you like hearing me, you know, give my perspective on cars, of all different kinds. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Again, it's the Rear View Mirror, and hopefully we'll have some more videos out like this here pretty soon.